In this video, we demonstrate the removal of eggs from a carpet python. This is a non-recovery surgery performed by myself as well as two of our technical team members. As a non-recovery surgery, our strict standard aseptic surgical techniques were not used because it's known that she'd be euthanized at the end. It is somewhat graphic, so we do recommend that viewer's discretion is advised. She was presented to us because of the inability to actually pass her eggs. She'd been monitored for approximately 2 weeks now that she was overdue. The owner, a very experienced snake breeder, was able to determine that it seemed though something was actually causing her to physically be unable to lay the eggs. Experience with the right environmental conditions where other snakes would certainly have laid, she seemed to have the inability to do so. Placing her under general anesthesia is done by placing a mask and using isoflurane in order to be able to bring her to a surgical plane. Her problem seemed to stem from the fact that normally in snakes and all reptiles, the urinary tract, the digestive tract, and the reproductive tract all come together into the back end where one port allows the exit of all of these materials. Her challenge seemed to be that there was something palpable that was blocking the ability of the eggs to pass on down. Upon further investigation, it was found that this was a large accumulation of urates, so essentially part of her urinary system had created a large pocket, causing accumulation of the white urates, blocking the ability of the eggs to pass on down. Once she'd achieved a plane of anesthesia that allowed us to undergo a surgical incision, the body cavity was opened through an incision in the underside, the ventral body wall, and extended up to an area that would, or a distance that would allow us then to be able to remove the eggs. The eggs were clearly palpable throughout the coelomic cavity. There were numerous of them. So blunt dissection and being able to actually manipulate the eggs to the point of where we could then exteriorize them and place pressure on them that would allow them then to come to the surface. We could then open up the uterus and remove the shell membrane, and that would then have the eggs being exposed. The objective here was to try and determine whether the eggs were still viable. So although we had plans on euthanizing her at the end of the procedure, perhaps there was a good possibility that many of these eggs may still be alive, and with incubation we'd be able to still produce some offspring. At this point, there was no good way to know whether these eggs are viable or not. She had been not at her ideal conditions for some time now, and so there was some speculation about the viability, or some concerns with regard to the viability. Nonetheless, the procedure seemed like a very reasonable thing to do, to be able to bring the eggs out and be able to incubate them afterwards. You can see here that the removal of the shell membrane then allows the egg to pop out, and this would then go off to the incubator. This was repeated numerous times by bringing the eggs and applying pressure from further up the body to essentially milk them down so that we could then remove the cranial, or the eggs that were located towards the front of the body, out through this incision. It was, however, found that retrieving the eggs from just slightly back of this incision was very, very difficult. They didn't seem to want to be able to move. Perhaps we had some adhesions that had formed because she was overdue. So a second incision was made further back in the body cavity in order to be able to bring these out through a separate incision. This process was continued, repeated over and over again, to the point of where we had removed 16 eggs altogether from the body cavity. And this was relatively straightforward. Once we had removed all of the eggs, then at that point she was kept under anesthesia until the time at which we had scheduled to have her euthanized. The egg collection was fairly decent, and at that point a lethal dose of an overdose of anesthetic was given to her, and she succumbed shortly thereafter. This would conclude the video. This was a non-recovery surgery. Again, sterile techniques were not used, and that she was humanely euthanized at the conclusion of this procedure.